I saw the one you wrote after the student senate meeting.
The one that went up last night. There's one that went up.
I have not seen that one.
You want me to email it? You sure? Well, it's not live yet.
Yeah, it'll go. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. I know there's some people from the press and some community members here. So we wanted to get together and talk about some of the conversations that have been going around and where we are with it and why Graduate Student Senate thinks this is necessary for the community. So we welcome any questions from the audience on that. You got our press release and the additional materials attached along with that. It had conversations from this year, but also spanning 10 years in the past. We want to keep this cordial and it's not meant to bash at anyone, but why this is necessary for our graduate students at this university. So with that, I'll just open it up. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that?
I wasn't prepared to make an opening statement. I will say that Graduate Student Senate has been approaching this process out of a desire to serve our constituents, not out of a desire to take away benefits or to attack anyone else. We've always approached any potential conflicts with other people from a direction of cooperation and desire to resolve things before they become heated. We have not always succeeded in that. And so I think we'll leave that where it is, but we have been coming from a direction to try and resolve things, not create conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I came today to talk about, it seems a little less than reasonable that there's only one representative for the graduate college in the Student Senate. And I've been to the GSS meetings. I'm not an active participant or a senator on that group, but I have filled in for somebody before and I've gone as like a viewer in the past, and it seems like those priorities are very geared towards graduate student research and the priorities of graduate students, and the fact that, I mean, to me, it seems reasonable to talk about the different priorities of an undergraduate group versus a graduate group. And in talking, I've served on like a grant review committee last week, over the last month, and some of these conversations came up, and the fact that like I have to personally fund my own research and conference travel, where I know multiple people at other institutions that have readily available funding for those pursuits, which are kind of geared more towards like the graduate group. I think having more control over some of those available funds would really help to promote the graduate research and like professional development that we're all interested in pursuing that might not be as much of a priority for undergraduates.
So I'll respond to that and say, when we went through this process of finding, like clearly defining our jurisdiction almost is how I would put it. We were not saying that we need to take the money away from Student Senate in any manner, shape, or form. They have needs and they have diverse needs that need to be fulfilled. So we are not saying that we need to take money from anyone to pay for anyone else, but having a streamline process of where graduate students can go makes a difference for meeting those needs. And the ambiguity that comes around graduate students not knowing where or who to lean in on is hard. So I'd say that when we went into this process, we were not talking about money at all. We know our budget is $3,354, and that is what it is. And we have like a separate pool of money for research funding and travel. That's $49,000. But we were not in any shape, manner saying that we're going to take money away from Student Senate. We recognize that graduate student organizations might take advantage of SAC funding, but we were okay with taking the cutbacks on that and providing for our graduate student population in other ways if that funding was to be taken away from SAC.
Yeah, I guess I brought that up because in some of the like materials provided, there's talk about the graduate student like fees being funneled into the student senate at large and not necessarily being prioritized for graduate student use, and that's where I thought that conversation might have been.
So the fee of the SAC money originates from something that all students pay into, like a pot of money. And it's hard for me to describe it, even though I've served on Budget Planning Council for 2 years. But that's kind of where that money comes from. And yes, it's that's why SAC funding is for all students. But we have no direct control over how those monies are managed. Yes, graduate students can serve on those committees, but we all know how graduate student lives are. It's almost impossible to make it to another commitment such as that.
From our conversations and our experiences, SAC funding disproportionately goes towards undergraduates. And so that is one of our concerns from the funding perspective, which I think reflects your comment.
And we have in the past sought information about where SAC funding goes and how it is allocated and where, and we have not gotten to the bottom of it and how much money is actually going to graduate student programming versus others. There are some institutional limitations on finding that because we don't register student organizations based on undergraduate student organizations or graduate student organizations. So those are also parts of that. And at the the Student Senate came to our meeting and presented, not the week before, the week before that when we met, and they alluded to the fact that they fund less than 5% of graduate student organizations. I don't have the hard numbers on that, but that's what they reported to us.
Who made that comment?
I believe it was their advisor, Jenny Hall Jones, who made that comment. But I think you had a question.
Yeah, this is my first meeting, though I'm interested in the Senate, first as a member, but personally as well, I've not been able to come, so I don't know a lot. But I originally come from Ghana, and we have the same structure. Thank you. No, thank you so much. We have the same structure and problem there, so I'm just using a bit of that knowledge to reflect what I'm going to say. Back to the funding bit where, so back home we call it the Student Representative Council, the SRC, so you have the grad students and that is the same as we have here. But then in terms of accumulation of funds, thank you so much, the undergraduates contribute, they pay a quota. And because as per numbers, automatically, even if we are supposed to separate from them, they will still have quite an amount of money because of their numbers. So technically, that is why first and foremost still preference is given to them in terms, or even they would end up being the presidents because voting comes down to numbers. That's one. Two, the same way in terms of accumulation of funds, if the university, I don't know how it works like you're saying, but if the university is taking some quota from the monies they are paying, then obviously us going to ask for quite a bunch of the money to come to us may also be another issue to contend with. So I'm raising this for all of us to see how maybe it may not be too practical because of the numbers, one, of graduate students, and even majority of graduate students are on assistantships. So we are not paying certain direct monies the way as undergraduates are doing. So I'm raising this also to ask, are there practical ways to get around this? Otherwise, are we just going down the rabbit hole, basically? Because these are the realities.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. And this is why I mentioned in the beginning, we are not talking about numbers or monies. And we are not talking that we need the separation or we need this kind of unique body of graduate students representing graduate students along all lines of administration without causing that ambiguity. So money is not the reason for that. It is for other reasons that I know ultimately gets connected with money, but like we said, we were ready to split and not take any money out of it, right? So but in other universities, and we did extensive research last year on other universities and how they prioritize their graduate student senates and their undergraduate student senates. And yes, some of them get proportional money. So they get, like, for every student that is an undergrad, you get $1. For every undergraduate student who comes, you get $2, something of that nature. And they give out pools of two or pots of two money to the two senates based on that. But it's also based on what the priorities of the institution is in terms of research or academic excellence, which all sometimes boil down to graduate students and the research expectations of the university. So we have collected data from some of the other universities that talk about how even though the number of graduate students are less, the university invests in that because that's a strategic priority for the university. And our President Nellis, has struck some of those priorities for us and has said that he wants to advance graduate education, he wants to advance research. And so having such a unique body of where we can come directly and kind of elevate these processes is required, and so that graduate students know exactly where to go and find those what we are doing well and what we are not doing well, so as to advance the university in the end. So this conversation is not just something that we thought about last night and we're like, okay, let's go do it, right? And it's been in conversations for many, many years. And a lot of our peers that we've been talking to, and we have this association with National Association for Graduate Professional Students, a lot of national institutions and Research One institutions are going down that pathway of having independent senates for these reasons. So while money is an issue, we were not focusing on that. We think that representation of graduate students is important in all university matters to advance graduate education.
I'll add 2 cents if that's okay, just to address the question directly. GSS is cognizant that undergraduates as a whole are paying more in fees into the pot than graduate students are. It's been part of the conversations we've had internally from the beginning that we're not looking for some kind of even split of pot of student funding. However, it is up to Graduate Student Senate to advocate for graduate students to make the case that, hey, graduate students are important to the strategic vision of Ohio University, and Ohio University needs to support graduate students and put money forward if it believes that.
I think it's also important to acknowledge, during this conversation that, GSS does acknowledge that there are plenty of SAC-funded programs that benefit graduate students. Many of them don't, but that's not to say that nothing that SAC currently funds benefits graduate students, because we do acknowledge that, and we think that's important. But going back to, as far as is it money or is it representation, I think it's important to remember that when the university talks about its student body, it does talk about it in two sets. It talks about its undergraduates and its graduates. That's because we're different demographics with different needs and different dedicated representation.
Thank you.
One of the things that we took away, so a few of us in GSS had gone to the National Association of Graduate Professional Students conference in November, I believe. And one of the biggest things we took away is the need for building community among graduate students. And to build that, you can't have two organizations that say we are kind of, one maybe saying we loosely represent you and one that says we represent you solely. Building community doesn't work that way. So and that is important for many other following reasons. So, we can talk about a number of reasons how we can build community, but one is like the infrastructure and the structural changes that need to happen for that. Other questions?
Just clarify something for my knowledge, I apologize for taking it, but so as graduate student senate, let's say you want to pass anything that goes higher, we do have to go through student senate in order to do that, is that correct?
It's not correct. We do have, so if you go to the president's website or if you go to any of the university official websites, they do list 5 senates separately, and there's they do actually call the student senate undergraduate student senate, graduate student senate, classified senate, faculty senate, and administrative senate. And we do have the voice that comes directly. So if we pass any resolution in the body, we can communicate directly with administrators on that. It just, over time, I think it has just varied how it's being received, because there is a body that says we represent all students. So President Nellis has been great at working with us directly, but the structure is not institutionalized. And what happens with that is that there is that instability. So we don't know in 3 years or 4 years if that would be maintained. And it has happened in the past where graduate student senate has been sort of obsolete and has not been considered in university matters. So in order to kind of institutionalize that and make sure that people are not fighting the same battle 10 years from now, right? And it takes away a lot of energy from us to do this all over again. And there are so many other matters around graduate student life and experiences and education that we should be focusing on, but this is kind of taking away some of those experiences from us. And if we could just move on from here, it makes it easier. And some of the materials I sent you 10 years from now, or 10 years ago, the same conversations were happening. People were fighting for the same things and they were having the same arguments. And graduate students said, oh, okay, let's change the way we dress so that we can compare ourselves to student senate, or let's do this. And we've done everything. And I just don't want people to keep going through this battle over and over again, because it's just draining, and we have so many other things where we can advance ourselves on.
I'll add that this is not a hypothetical situation that there's conflict between these two bodies and who we represent. At the student senate meeting last week, where they proposed constitutional amendment to change their language of who they represent to just be undergraduate students, I was there representing Graduate Student Senate in case they had any questions, which I saw as an effort to be cooperative and make sure that someone was there to answer questions if they had any for the amendment they were proposing. Among the concerns of student senators was their belief that they were more able to represent certain segments of graduate students than Graduate Student Senate was. And I think that those kind of questions should be addressed to them. I don't feel capable of answering for their reasons. I find it baffling and frustrating.
Yeah, this kind of blows my mind because they're mutually exclusive. You cannot be an undergraduate and a graduate student, and you cannot be a graduate student without having already been an undergraduate and moved on. Thank you for fighting it.
What sections of the graduate group were they arguing they were more capable of representing?
The points they raised were specifically about people with special needs or handicaps. And apologize for my language if I should be using different terms. Where they felt that we did not have a special commissioner, I suppose, to address those needs. Therefore, we could not represent anyone who had special needs on campus who is in the graduate body. And because they do have people in the body who represent those needs, they should be representing graduate students who have those needs. And I don't want to sound like I'm attacking that. I think it's very good that they're representing people with diverse needs. I think we also represent people with diverse needs and very different needs, and we listen to everyone in our body who has something to say, and we have our constitution and our bylaws allow people to come forward and say, hey, I want to represent this constituency, and we can appoint special commissioners for any particular topic. And so those seats are open and available. We're not excluding people who have any need or want to represent any issue. We just don't happen to have one right now. And part of that is because graduate students are very, very busy, and we can't have 1,000 graduate students representing every particular need. So we have a representative democracy.
Cole, do you have a-
Yeah, you had said that one representative, referring to the one that is currently in place as a professional student in the student senate body through HCOM, that they can't adequately represent over 6,000 graduate students. Has there been any specific resolution or bill passed by student senate that is, I guess, inadequately represented graduate students or had like a negative effect on graduate students that they passed because they didn't have proper representation?
I don't know. Like if you take a look at all the resolutions that we pass in our body and all the resolutions that they pass in their body, it's very different. It's just fundamentally different in what they are looking for versus what we are looking for as graduate students. And so I cannot think of any resolution that would have conflicted with the interest of graduate students off the top of my head. I know in the past, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a graduate college senator in student senate who disagreed a lot with how their resolutions were passed. And there was a lot of conflict with his representation in the body. So that's the only background I can give from that. Yeah.
I think it's only natural. The student senate resolutions are written and promoted and voted on by undergraduate students. And so they don't generally come into conflict with ours or with us because they address undergraduate needs.
So then, if they address undergraduate needs, do you think that it's inappropriate to say they represent all students? If you said all their, not all, but most, I don't want to put words in your mouth, most of the resolutions or bills that they present are for undergraduate needs. Because of that, is it inappropriate for them to say in their constitution that they represent all students?
I think it's inappropriate for them to characterize themselves as a representative democracy of all students on campus. So, to clarify, they do currently open their elections so that all students can vote. But being able to vote doesn't mean that you have a representative you can vote on.
And one of the statements that was provided to Student Senate as part of the resolution that they were taking up was from a graduate student who served or was here for her undergrad degree. So she was here for 4 years. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I'll read it for the record. So she says, to the representatives of Student Senate, my name is Amy Musselman, and I serve as the Chief of Staff for Graduate Student Senate. While I'm a first-year master's student in critical studies in educational foundations, I've been a part of Ohio University for 5 years, obtaining a bachelor's degree from the institution in May 2018. My undergraduate and graduate career indeed share the same physical landscape, yet reside in different contexts. I'm faced with concerns that I did not encounter as an undergraduate. Spending additional conscious time and effort on finances, mental health, and professionalism. Not only do I have to worry about my own academic success, but that of the students which I serve as a teaching assistant, a new facet of responsibility. Thus, I appreciate and support Resolution 1819-103, notating Student Senate as a voice of undergraduate students. This recognizes the varying, yet not any less significant duties of undergraduate and graduate students. It is imperative GSS becomes an autonomous body serving graduate students more efficiently to improve the Bobcat community. So I hope that explains how undergraduate needs are very different from graduate needs. And we have in our body at least 5 members, including one of my execs, Michael, who went to school here as undergrad and then came here for graduate education. And they might or might not have served in undergraduate or in Student Senate when they were undergraduates, but have found this community of Graduate Student Senate to be effective in voicing their concerns and being a representative on it. So. Yes.
So what's the way forward? What's the status quo? I know you may have said this a lot because I read outline. I didn't, but I just read the body, so that's why I came of all the days. But what's the status quo? Because I believe all graduate students will unanimously agree that we have to be autonomous. So if you could brief us on that.
Yeah, so we are looking to the graduate student body for ideas on how to move forward. I personally, as the president of Graduate Student Senate for the last 2 years, think that this needs to end and we need not come back to this conversation over and over again in circular manners, in a cyclical manner every 10 years and revisit this because it's taking a lot out of what else we could be focusing on and advancing. So we are looking for ideas from y'all to give us. In Graduate Student Senate, we have a very diverse body of students. We have international students, we have domestic students, we have students who did their undergrad here in various other places, people who have had professional careers and came back. So all these needs are needed, and if we are keeping on focusing on this, we are not moving forward. So if you have any ideas, we're looking to you to send it to us so we can kind of mobilize on it and get this done once and for all.
I'll add, coming out of the Student Senate meeting last week, we realized that there was a lot of misinformation, miscommunication. And so we saw a first step as getting information out there, making the points known, clarifying any misunderstandings that exist, so that we're all on the same playing field, if information's available, and people aren't throwing misinformation back and forth. So this is our first step. Next steps are on the table for suggestions. We have some ideas, but we need help.
Can I please ask a follow-up question? Are there set laid down regulations that we have to satisfy to be autonomous? Do you get my question?
Yeah, so we have looked and talked to advisors. Can we follow, like, who do we need to talk to? What do we need to do to make this happen? At the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that Student Senate is the only voice over their own constituency. Did their constitutional amendment pass where they have autonomy from the Board of Trustees?
Not yet. So it comes to vote.
They're seeking independence of the Board of Trustees, so not even the Board of Trustees would have control over who they say they represent if this passes. I mean, we cannot dictate Student Senate's choice for who they say they represent. All we can do is advocate to administration and to the Board of Trustees on behalf of graduate students. And we have been doing our best to cooperate with all of the parties. And on a functional level, I think it's working, and they recognize us as independent and as the sole voice. But we need this to be written down, language institutionalized.
No, go ahead.
So there has been examples in the past where we have lost representation from the table. And that is what we don't want to do if we just keep it status quo. And which goes back to like why we need to institutionalize it. The Student Senate Constitution says they represent all students. We in GSS do not have jurisdiction over that and how they change it or how they phrase it. So we were hoping that the 36 votes in GSS meant something to Student Senate, that 36 graduate Student Senate members came out and supported this resolution wholeheartedly without any reservations. And we thought that would be enough for them to understand that this matters to graduate students, but apparently it did not.
36 graduate students representing thousands across campus. This is representative democracy. And they think that graduate students still would prefer to be represented by Student Senate. Ask them if they disagree.
So it was Student Senate, who was run by undergrads, that voted the Chinese for the lack of autonomy.
Yes.
And how many, so it's only undergrads voting on our autonomy? I just want to clarify. Okay.
Besides the one.
Besides the one.
So this would have been a constitutional change. They have to pass the constitutional change within their body and then would go to a vote of all students on campus.
Okay.
But it didn't get to that point because it didn't pass within their body.
How long before that can be done then? Is that possible?
It would have to be.
We would have to look at their rules. If it doesn't pass their body, it will never go out to the general public.
And so they would have to bring it to the floor again, which
They have a meeting to move. Huh?
Who presented that? Like,
Maddie Sloat was the primary sponsor.
No, Walter.
Walter was
Walter
the
Milhon. Yeah,
Oh.
Walter Milhon was the primary sponsor on the constitutional amendment change. He's the Chief Justice for Student Senate.
A number of the rest of the execs co-sponsored.
During the meeting, they did co-sponsor.
And those are undergraduates or graduates?
All
Undergraduate
undergraduate
students. They wrote it, they sponsored.
But Amanda, you had a question, and
So
Conrad.
leading up to this resolution, how did they, in what ways did Student Senate reach out to the graduate student body to get feedback, or thoughts, opinions, concerns?
About the resolution itself.
Right, and in this topic, have you had a place on the floor to go in front of the Senate and actually address why how we won't do it?
Yeah, thank you. So we have been in Graduate Student Senate, been taking the approach of like, we need this, versus them recognizing that the graduate student body needs this, if that makes sense. So since last year, we have passed a number of resolutions towards this. They did come to a few of our meetings last year and express their concerns over us separating and what it would mean. So we did our homework and collected data and compared ourselves to other schools and all that stuff. Came back this year, and from the beginning, I've been talking to the execs to say, we want this, graduate student body wants this, how can we make this happen? We passed a constitutional amendment in our body because nothing else was moving to kind of reaffirm that we were the sole voice of graduate students on campus. Soon after that, Student Senate passed a resolution to take it to the Board of Trustees that they were independent of the Board of Trustees. And that was in the June meeting that they did that, or January meeting that they did that. We had concerns over that because we felt that we were being sort of silenced and put away in a way. We took then the approach of expressing our concerns to the board and letting them know that we were not happy with this approach and this because it seemed kind of underhanded to get permission of independence from the board in order for them to function. And we saw that as a sort of a threat to us. And so I made statements to other members of the body, wrote editorials that was received by the Board of Trustees. We again had some as a result of that, us making the statements and all that, the Vice President for Student Affairs brought Maddie Sloat, the President of Student Senate, and me together. And we had conversations around this topic again, and we talked about how this was mutually beneficial for both of us to do this. So then recently, Student Senate came to our body and presented what they do, and which was also a response to some of the things that happened in January.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago. And then I went to their meeting the very next day and presented to them why we need this. So a lot of the stuff that we've discussed already, they asked some of the similar questions that were raised at their meeting last time on these concerns. I thought I answered that to the full extent I could. So we've had conversations. When it came to writing the resolution, we did not have a hand in that. They wrote the resolution and sent it to us and asked us what it looks. And they had two resolutions, or a resolution and a bill. The bill did not do anything. It was just saying that we are what we are as a body right now. So as a body, we looked at it and unanimously everyone voted for the independence. And then it went to the Student Senate.
Will you elaborate on the timeline of their constitutional amendment proposal? When they got it to us and
Yeah, so usually our agenda goes out at 5 p.m. on Mondays before our meeting. Our meetings are on Tuesdays. We got the resolutions from Student Senate at 6:19 p.m. on Monday night. So it did not really go with my agenda. So I had to send it as a separate announcement to the body the next day. So is that
So yeah, so we got it the night before our meeting. That was the first time we had seen the language of the proposal, the proposed constitutional amendment. We had time to read over it. We hastily wrote a resolution in our body in a brief break between the presentation and the start of our formal meeting. But it still passed unanimously. And so it was the product, I thought, of this multi-year conversation about independence that they said, hey, yeah, let's actually do something. And here's what we wrote. Yeah, it was a little late, but here it is so that you can look at it and see what you think. We were grateful, I thought, to have a genuine, heartfelt, attempt to kind of bridge this gap, bridge this conflict that has happened. And so we wrote a resolution, we voted on it. We had members write statements sharing their support about it. And I went to Student Senate to represent that and say, hey, yeah, graduate students are all about this thing that you're proposing. And so that's where that came from.
Yeah, literally people wrote the resolution during the meeting because we thought it was very important to put it out there that we support this. And there are 30 members of the body, 36 members on that day that really support this and want this. And so, yeah.
I'll add that attempts like this, writing a constitutional amendment that addresses all of the things that we have asked for over the years, and then even the sponsors voting no on it feels disingenuous. It feels like it was an attempt to yank us around, to offer us false choice. Yeah, we'll propose what you want, but we're just doing it for show.
So what are the procedures for potentially prompting another constitutional amendment in Student Senate? Is the one graduate student representative able to propose resolutions? Can we go to the Board of Trustees? Is that why it's a threat that they're trying to be independent from the Board of Trustees? Because that's the only group of people that has the power to potentially prompt this change or enforce this kind of change. So if they were independent from them, we would have no recourse. Is that reality? How do we go about prompting them to facilitate change?
I can address part of your question. All of the Senates right now have to have their constitutions approved by the Board of Trustees. Board of Trustees gives us the power to operate. And so right now, the Board of Trustees can withhold any constitutional changes that they don't like. That said, if the Board of Trustees approves this new thing, then there's absolutely no one who has the power of oversight.
So they have to approve it, but can they prompt changing it? Can they say that if we were to make a strong enough case, could they say you guys need to change your constitution?
I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I don't know if Dr. Kuntz, since you're an administrator.
They can make them changes if they could, if someone suggests they change it.
Yeah, I don't think we want to suggest that the Board of Trustees should be heavy-handed and dictate how the Senate should write their constitutions. Certainly, we don't want that. We don't think any of the other Senates want their structure dictated by the Board of Trustees.
And Amanda is the chair of the classified Senate, so I don't know, Amanda, if you have any insight on.
Well, Maureen, I think I've shared this one in my personal thoughts on this while I'm really about this today. But each Senate does have a voice at the table, and I didn't learn until afterwards that undergraduate student Senate and graduate Senate were not two separate entities. I've asked you this question. You already have a voice at the table, so what would be the benefit of you actually separating versus what you have now? But then also, what is it that undergraduate student Senate feels would be their greatest threat through you all separating? Besides funding, Because we talked about that, but is there any?
To your first question, I think, like I mentioned previously, it is the fact that we want to institutionalize the system and lay down the infrastructure for that happening. It's not only in funding that we have the resources. Like when I say the word resources or infrastructure, it doesn't mean just funding. It means the capacity for the university to give us assistance on things. There is a big inequality in how student senate and graduate student senate are treated right now, and it's gotten so much better over the year in the last 2 years. But like 3 years ago, when the interviews for the president of the university was happening, there was not a representative from graduate student senate who was on that search committee, and those are important conversations. The graduate students should have a say in who the next president of the university is. There was a graduate student, but they were selected from student senate. So was there true representation from all the 5 senates at that table? Is a question to be asked. And we don't want to see such practices over and over again, and these battles over and over again when this is not institutionalized. So I would say that is what my major goal for separating, and what GSS has recognized why we need that. And I will let Rachel answer part of that in a second. But I would say the threat to them, I don't know what the threat to them is. We have tried to keep the conversations open and understand what that is. And we haven't been told what exactly their threat is. They just keep insisting that they represent all students. And I don't know how to answer to that, except that they don't truly, even if I was not in this position, I don't think they truly represent my unique needs as a graduate student. But Rachel, if you want to talk about the initial part and how in your role as a women's commissioner, what you think, how there's a women's commissioner for student senate and there's one for graduate student senate, and how the resources are very, very different for those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it boils down to historically the ways in which student senate serves the needs of which populations, right? So, because we have a population that I think it's like 23,000 undergraduate students, and for graduate students it's significantly less, they're serving the needs of undergraduate students, right? And in my role as Women's Affairs Commissioner, a lot of what I've been working on this year is how to address the problem of sexual assault on campus. And with a lot of the cases that we've seen with sexual assault that has to do with graduate students, it's a faculty to student sort of scenario. And the ways in which, Student Senate is addressing these issues has to do with more student-to-student relationships, which, might serve the needs of undergraduate students, but their kind of focus isn't really serving the needs of graduate students necessarily. So I think the separation will kind of help to shed light on how the needs are certainly much different than what they are for undergraduate students. And it kind of points back to what is student senate currently doing to service graduate students right now. And I guess that would be, if we were to look at that, it is a little bit minimal. If they're claiming to represent all students, it's hard to point to certain things they're doing that address the specific needs of graduate students, as Maria said.
And there's also examples of how, like in the last 2 years, I've had to rebuild a lot of relationships on a lot of committees. And so one example is Joint Police Advisory Council, JPAC, which is a city and university relationship. In the past, many years ago, there was a unique spot at the table for a graduate student because a lot of graduate students live out in the community, and there are specific needs for that at the table. And there was undergraduate student at the table. Slowly over the years, both those positions were kind of swapped up by Student Senate, and there are 2 undergraduate students on that at the table now. And it's really hard when we had to go back and tell them to like create a position for us. And the mayor was very responsive to that and created a position for me or for a graduate student to be at the table. And we have had to do that for multiple organizations and relationships on campus. And this is just not sustainable and not, it's very time consuming. It takes away a lot. The Women's Center is another one. In the last 3 years, we've had a very strong relationship with the Women's Center, and we even host a conference for women in grad school. And these are like strong relationships that we've had to build, but they die out when it's not sustained. So that is what graduate students need, like want, like over the money. Like we're not even talking about the money anymore. It's about representation. And in our university, at Ohio University, our graduate programs are very decentralized. We do not have a central system of controlling every program and department. So even in the College of Arts and Sciences, English might do some things very differently from chemistry does. And we have at Graduate Student Senate a type of representation that goes down to the department level because we recognize the unique needs of the different students in different departments. And in Student Senate, they have just like the college level representation, which is inadequate to address the various needs of graduate students. So hopefully that answered some of your questions.
I have a question. And not to mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot in graduate college on the spot, but I have been curious of how does graduate college feel about this separation? What kind of support are you getting? The reason I ask that is because classified employees are supported solely by HR. So I have a close relationship with HR. And when I go to suggest a college policy change or create a policy, if I don't have that support from them, I know that I'm not going to get very far. So I'm just curious of what the support or thoughts.
I don't want to like directly speak for graduate college. I'd say that they do recognize the need for us, I think, as a unique body, or because Graduate Council, which is a standing committee and has representation from different graduate programs, and the Senate, Graduate Student Senate is the only one that has seat at their table. So I would see that as sort of a reflection of their support of us. Graduate College advises us, and I don't know further into, I think they recognize, just like other graduate students, that it is important to have this seat at the table, but I don't know if any administrator wants to be in this space of telling a larger student body what or how they should do it. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that. But Connor, you had a question before that. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I just okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're asking for suggestions, and I think that's a very good foundational suggestion, because change comes not only through numbers, but you need strategic allies. If we're going to push this, and because from your answer I'm getting that it's not an emphatic yes, right? And I think that is very critical, because if we are pushing this, and Graduate College of all is not the big institutional support behind us, it may be difficult to have a win. So I feel we need strategic allies, and I feel that's a very good key starting point, that we need to make sure that we have this conversation intensively and extensively with Graduate College and get them on board with us. Because I feel that we don't even have to defend it, because it is clear that undergraduates will have their own needs and we have our own needs, and the diverse composition of graduate students and even the way our life is structured on campus alone tells that we do need that autonomy. But we need Graduate College backing us, otherwise we may run out of steam. So we need to think around and have that honest conversation.
So I'll say that I have meetings with different administrators on campus. So I meet with Graduate College, I meet with the president's office, I meet with the provost, I meet with student affairs, which is supposed to also encompass all students on campus. And no one told me not to take this forward. But again, I think administrators are also in a precarious situation where they do not want to dictate to a student body how where their alliance lies, I guess. So yeah, so I don't know how they not put them on the spot.
This is difficult because generally you don't want administrators to get involved in the affairs of representative bodies on campus, like student bodies. I think you're right. The strategic allies is essential to move forward. Without administration support, without Graduate College support, how could we move forward? And so we would welcome that. We would encourage that kind of explicit statement that they believe that this is the right way forward, and if not, to give us clear reasons why.
Yeah, I didn't mean to ask that question and create a lecture. I was just generally curious of the support. And while administrators don't have to necessarily get involved, but sometimes it's helpful just to have the support and know that they're listening to and they do have your best interest. So I hope I didn't cause a bigger problem.
Yeah.
They're both good questions and good points.
Yeah, no, I think you didn't, but it also comes back to being explicit in what we want and in identifying the structure as well. So it's not necessarily asking them to dictate, but also knowing who our strategic allies can be, not necessarily pulling them in, asking them to make a decision for us, but let's also note that they play a critical role in the lives of every graduate student. Mm-hmm. So it may even happen in their informal conversations, but assuming it without being strategic and formal about it can hurt us in the efforts we are investing. So I think from a management and leadership and change point of view, strategic allies are always key, and it's important we identify them and we know how to pull them into the conversation.
Yes.
I just have a question, and I don't come off a certain way, but what have we done to change the minds of the undergraduates who run Student Senate? And I ask this because lots of times I talk to undergraduates and they have no idea what my life is like as a grad student. Like, why are you at your desk 8 hours a day? What do you mean you have to get your own funding? So I guess what have we done to kind of just from a very nice, non-condescending place, just be hey, this is what our life looks like and this is why our needs are so different.
I think the undergraduates recognize our needs are different, or at least the execs probably recognize.
Within Student Senate, there is at least some understanding that there are different needs, and they acknowledge that, which is why they put out a statement saying they defer to Graduate Student Senate on issues specific to graduate students, which again, if they do defer, then why continue to claim? Anyway, yes, so there seems to be understanding within people who are aware of what Graduate Student Senate is and who work closely with graduate students. Outside of that, you're right, there's a lot of ignorance, not placing blame anywhere, but It goes back to why we're here today. We need to start educating people about the different needs and the reasons that this conversation is important.
I'd say also that we have in Graduate Student Senate, since I started as president, I have had appointed positions, and most of my appointed positions are held by undergraduate students, and they are very supportive of, and they recognize that it's two very different things. And there are also populations of undergraduate students who do not even know what Student Senate is. And I don't expect all graduate students, the 6,000 graduate students, to know that there is a Graduate Student Senate either. So there is differences in that aspect. The students who work for me or in their appointed positions wouldn't do it if they knew that Student Senate gave them that outlet, right? So there is something that draws them to us versus them. So that is important to recognize. But there's also this piece within Student Senate that I've heard over the years of this like legacy that they have to keep holding on to, that they need to represent all students. And it's just like a point of pride, a legacy that they have to maintain, and a history, something that stems from history. And yeah, maybe like 60 years ago that worked, but the world has changed in the 60 years also. And there were many practices that we did 60 years ago that we look down upon now and are ashamed of. And so there's always an opportunity to change for the better. And we think this is one of those changes that needs to happen for the better.
I think one of their arguments too is that they're worried about the fracturing between the relationship between the two bodies. They're worried that, if we separate that graduate student and student center are not going to work together on anything. And that's certainly not what we want at all. And there are times when, student senate and graduate student center work well together and times when we don't work well together. Us being under their purview is kind of not really related to how good our relationship is. So even if we were, our own separate body as we should be, I don't see it having any effect on our relationship between student senate and graduate student senate.
I would also add that I mentioned this earlier in the community building piece. When a new graduate student comes to campus, they go to orientation, and in the International Student Orientation, for example, there is both Student Senate there, or International Graduate Student Orientation. There's both Student Senate there, and there is Graduate Student Senate there. And the new student is going, what? Like, where? Who should I talk to? Like, who is the person? And it just causes that ambiguity among folks to not know who to directly go to, right? And the same happens. You all probably get an email from Student Senate every month that says, this is what we're doing. And then we send as Graduate Student Senate. So to the audience that we are trying to reach and build community with, it is very confusing. They are going, what? Like, who? And so how do we build the graduate student population, like graduate experience and graduate life and all that stuff, if this fractured message comes to graduate students on campus, right? So I'd say that's another point to mention.
Yeah, I can elaborate for a moment on cooperation between the two bodies. Graduate Student Senate recognizes that graduate students and undergraduates have a lot in common and a lot that we can advocate together. Even though our perspectives are not the same, we share a lot. And we have worked together on issues like health insurance, where Graduate Student Senate has looked at an issue and said, oh, we can't make this decision on our own. We need to work together with undergraduates. That kind of cooperation does not come from the fact that that Student Senate claims graduate student senate representation. It comes from the fact that we have two strong independent bodies, and we have good administrative people who can say, hey, we need to tackle this issue. Here's some people who can work on a task force to address this. How do we look at this fairly and comprehensively? And then who do we need to walk with? Who are our other stakeholders? Graduate Student Senate works to represent graduate students, but it recognizes where its limitations are and who its partners are and who it needs to talk to before it can make decisions. We are not trying to overreach. We are trying to work together with the people who are our natural allies cooperatively.
And the Student Senate is also advised, their faculty advisor or staff advisor is Dr. Jenny Hall-Jones, but their main advisor is a graduate student who has a GA position. So one might even ask, how is that possible, right? Like, how can you represent the interest of someone who you employ, right? And that's why in our different constituents and different senates, we have clear-cut jurisdictions. For a graduate student, I used to teach a class. How can I tell, those power differentials matter, right? And those can be misused too. So it's also important to recognize that there might be a conflict of interest, and we need to have this clear jurisdictions for those reasons too. A lot of you are TAs, I'm sure, and have that kind of influence with your undergraduates. So do you want to, if you have an issue, would you take it to them to advocate for you, or it does cause a power differential and
There's a conflict of interest that's inherent in their present structure. Can we address any further questions?
thank you all for,
I'm sorry.
thank you all for taking the time to come and engage with us. We are looking for ways forward. We do have some ideas, but feel free to send it to us along so we can see this to an end soon. But thank you all for taking the time. Sorry.
No, you're good. Great. Everyone gets to see my pretty face as I figure out how to